back to what I often call Menopause University. I'm Menopause Taylor, giving you the full education that you need to manage your menopause your way successfully. I strive to make sure you really understand everything. Unfortunately, most women understand very little. Not only are they lacking in facts, they are also overwhelmed by fear and confusion. And I am trying to change that for you. So I give you information in a very logical, orderly, and stepwise manner. Right now, we're addressing a unit on heart attacks, and this is video 178. It will cover research on HRT and heart attacks. Despite the fact that heart attacks are the most worrisome aspect of menopause, there is still quite a bit of confusion about it. And some of the confusion is the result of research on HRT and heart attacks. Women don't know what to believe, and they feel like the story just keeps changing. You may be one of those women. So here you are, trying to decide how to reduce your risk for a heart attack, and every time you turn around, you hear something different about HRT and heart attacks. You hear about one study that shows that HRT decreases heart attacks, and then you hear another study showing that HRT increases heart attacks. So you're left wondering, well, which is it? They can't all be right. So today, I'm going to walk you through the research studies that have led us to where we are today. And I'm going to make it a whole lot easier than it would be for you to have to read all those research studies yourself. And if you're wondering why you should watch this video, the answer is really simple. No one else is going to tell you this stuff but me. All you get from other people is snippets of this and that. And you know, I just don't work that way. I'll start by explaining a few things about research itself. That's the most basic thing you need to know in order to make sense of anything. So here's how a research study comes about. Researchers live in a world of endless quandaries. No matter what they know to be fact at the time, there are always unanswered questions. And they're all nerds like me, and we always want the answers. So they design studies to answer the unanswered questions. The problem is that most things in medicine have a lot of variables. Variables are all the things that add up to create an outcome. Actually, research is a lot like life. Let's say you want to know why you're short. It could be for a variety of reasons. It could be genetic, or the fact that you were malnourished as a child could have something to do with it. Or maybe it's partly due to the fact that you've always lived at a very high altitude where the air contains less oxygen and people don't grow as tall. Or maybe you were exposed to something when you were very young that caused your bones to stop growing prematurely. So how do you decide what caused you to be short? So research addresses things like this and seeks to discover the answer. Of course, sometimes there isn't just one answer. And that's part of the reason you feel confused about things from time to time. If you recall that long list of risk factors for a heart attack that I gave you back in video 167, it took a lot of research studies to discover that each of those factors increased your risk of heart attack. And the problem for researchers is how to isolate each factor so that the other factors don't affect the data. For instance, obesity is a risk factor for heart attack. And a sedentary lifestyle is a risk factor for heart attack. But the vast majority of obese people have sedentary lifestyles. So how do you separate them in a research study and prevent one from confounding the other? For every fact in medicine, multiple research studies contributed to the fact that it's a fact rather than a hypothesis. And how the research is designed can greatly affect the results of the study also. I'll show you an example. Let's say that based on current knowledge, you hypothesize that this marble will not roll spontaneously on a flat surface. So you design a study to prove that. The objective of your study is to prove that marbles do not roll spontaneously on a flat surface without something to start them rolling in the first place. And if you put this marble on a flat surface, it's true. This proves your hypothesis. Marbles do not roll spontaneously on flat surfaces without something to start them rolling in the first place. Ooh, but what if, unbeknownst to you, the surface is not flat? What if it's slanted? If you put the marble on this slanted surface, it does roll. Well, if that's the case, your results will be just the opposite. You will prove your hypothesis to be completely wrong. So researchers have to anticipate every little thing that might change their results. And sometimes they do a good job of that, but sometimes they don't or can't. You can't control everything. So I'm going to walk you through the research on HRT and heart attacks. And I think you'll find it both interesting and informative. But before I do that, I'm going to dwell on something that should be obvious, but apparently isn't. I want to discuss 3 words that will make all the difference in your ability to understand this information on heart attack research. Overlooking the significance of these 3 words and their differences is what creates all the confusion. The 3 words are prevent, cause, and treat. And clarifying their differences is absolutely critical to your understanding. Prevent means that you inhibit the disease from developing in the first place. In other words, it's something that applies to healthy people. In this case, women with no heart disease at all. Cause means that you take or do something that begins the process of disease development. It starts the whole process that becomes a disease. In this case, atherosclerosis, or buildup of fat in your arteries. Treat means that you take something to reverse a disease process. You either stop it from progressing or you reverse the severity of it. It's like erasing the disease to a degree. And for treatment, you have to have the disease in the first place. I like to think of these 3 things as being like time. Prevention is what you do before you have a disease. Cause is what you do at present to create the disease. Treat is what you do in the future after you've already gotten the disease. Essentially, they constitute the before, during, and after phases of a disease process. Now, as trivial and obvious as this sounds, distinguishing between prevention, cause, and treatment is the very, very most important thing you can remember. It's at the very root of everything I'm going to present to you today. So pay attention to which of the 3 each study addresses. If you do, you'll find this all very logical. If you don't, you'll find it all very contradictory. Okay, so now I'll give you the background from which all these studies on HRT and heart attacks derived. And as we progress, we'll create a chart summarizing our results. You'll see some obvious things that reveal themselves as we go along. In video 61 on the history of menopause, I taught you that women didn't routinely live long enough to experience menopause until the late 1800s and early 1900s. And that's when it became obvious that women didn't have heart attacks until after they became postmenopausal. And at first, everybody thought that heart attacks were merely a function of aging. I mean, men had them too. So no one gave much thought to the fact that estrogen loss might have something to do with it. So here's our chart. It has columns for the date, the current knowledge at the time, the study name, the objective of the study, the variables of the study, and the findings of the study. In the column for findings, you see a green positive sign, which indicates a positive effect on HRT and heart attacks. In other words, meaning the HRT does decrease heart attacks. Or you see a red negative, which indicates a negative effect of HRT on heart attacks, which means that HRT does not decrease heart attacks. So if we fill in the chart with the information I just told you, it would look like this. But then doctors began noticing that when women had premature menopause, well before the average age of menopause, they too had higher rates of heart attack. And this didn't make sense with the logic at the time. If heart attacks in women were merely due to aging, then women who became postmenopausal prematurely shouldn't have heart attacks earlier than those who became postmenopausal at older ages. So let's add that to our chart. And then doctors started noticing that women who had their ovaries removed, which constitutes surgical menopause, also had higher rates of heart attacks. And many of these women were young too. So that didn't make sense with the hypothesis that heart attacks in women were only due to aging. This is the kind of quandary that sends researchers searching for answers. For scientists, everything has to make sense. By the mid-1900s, doctors routinely gave women hormone replacement when they became postmenopausal. It was like any other hormone deficiency. You replace what's lost. And by the late 1960s, estrogen was the most frequently prescribed drug in the United States and many other countries. Most women continued to take HRT forever once they started it. So for about 50 years, from the mid-1900s to the early 1990s, doctors noticed that women who took HRT had much lower rates of heart attack than women who didn't. And the differences were quite drastic. By the early 1990s, it was plainly obvious that HRT had the effect of preventing heart attacks in women. Pay attention to the fact that I said preventing. I did not say treating. So at this point, all we're talking about is the ability of HRT to prevent a heart attack in women with no heart disease in the first place. But there were no real research studies to prove that. So that piqued the interest of many a researcher, and the race to prove it began. One of the earliest research studies was the Estrogen in the Prevention of Atherosclerosis trial. Now I'll warn you, all these studies have long names, and because they all have long names, they all have acronyms for their long names. So the Estrogen in the Prevention of Atherosclerosis trial is known as EPAD, E-P-A-T. The objective of EPAD was to determine if HRT stabilizes, retards, or reverses the progression of atherosclerosis in postmenopausal women. It studied women who had no heart disease. And of course, women with no heart disease have a lower risk of heart attack. The study included women ranging in age from 46 to 80. And the conclusion was that HRT did indeed stabilize, retard, or reverse the progression of atherosclerosis in postmenopausal women. But notice, they only studied with women with no heart disease. In other words, we're still dealing with prevention here. So here's our chart reflecting this study. The next study was the Postmenopausal Estrogen and Progestin Intervention Trial, or PEPI, P-E-P-I. sought to show that the way in which HRT prevents heart attacks is that it has a beneficial effect on lipids and blood pressure. It studied healthy postmenopausal women aged 45 to 64. And it proved that HRT did indeed improve lipids and blood pressure. So once again, we're still dealing with prevention. And the next study was the Estrogen Replacement and Atherosclerosis Trial, or ERA. And the researchers of this trial said, well, hey, if estrogen does all these great things to reduce heart attacks in women without atherosclerosis, how about doing a study on HRT's ability to reverse atherosclerosis in women who already have it? So note that now the focus has gone from women with healthy hearts to women with unhealthy hearts. So now we're dealing with treatment. And they discovered that once there was already lipid buildup in the arteries, HRT did nothing to improve it, which means that HRT did not treat heart disease. So here's our chart with the first red negative sign. Next in line was the Heart and Estrogen Progestin Replacement Study, or HERS. Its researchers said, well, okay, HRT can't reverse the lipid buildup that's already there, so it can't be used as treatment. But what about its ability to still lower the risk of heart attack in women with some lipid buildup? In other words, the lipid buildup in your arteries may put you at risk for a heart attack, but maybe HRT can prevent you from actually having a heart attack. This is still a form of treatment. They are assessing whether HRT can stop the progress of heart disease. It studied older women with an average age of 73, and the result was that HRT did not prevent heart attacks in women who already had buildup of lipids in their arteries. In other words, HRT did not treat heart disease. Next was the Women's Estrogen Progestin Lipid-Lowering Hormone Atherosclerosis Regression Trial. What a name. It's also known as WellHeart. It had the same objective as the ERA trial, to determine if HRT could reduce heart attack in women with already existing heart disease. But these researchers designed the study a bit differently than the ERA study. They compared postmenopausal women with heart disease and without heart disease. And what they found was that HRT did prevent heart attacks in women who did not already have heart disease, but that it did not prevent them in women who did already have heart disease. So this is the first study to demonstrate that the effect of HRT was dependent on whether or not there was already lipid buildup in the arteries. Now remember this, because it's a turning point in our current understanding. This is the first study that makes a distinction and actually compares prevention and treatment. At the same time that the WellHeart study was going on, the Women's Health Initiative, or WHI, was already underway. Its objective was to determine if HRT could prevent heart attacks. But it did not distinguish pre-existing heart health status. It just addressed all hearts equally and asked, can HRT prevent heart attacks or not? So it did not distinguish between prevention and treatment. And it studied women with an average age of 63, but did not separate them with regard to age or heart health status. If you've been watching my videos, you already know that age and heart health status are absolutely critical to your risk of heart attack. So ignoring age and heart health status is like ignoring everything except genetics in determining why you're short. Now, this WHI is the study with which most women are familiar, and that's because the media reporting of the results created a tidal wave in the use of HRT that has continued until this day. The WHI was reported as showing that HRT caused heart attacks. Now, I just told you that it was a study designed to determine if HRT can prevent heart attacks. So how did the researchers switch gears from studying prevention to studying cause? You see, when it comes to research, you have to stay really focused. You can't get distracted. The way you design a study to determine cause is completely different than the way you design a study to determine prevention. And that's why this particular study was so shocking. It should not have been. It was no more remarkable than any of the other studies I've mentioned. But have you heard of any of the others? I'm going to bet you haven't. And the reason you haven't is because they weren't distorted and sensationalized. Their results were just added to the growing fund of knowledge and set the stage for the next study. So let me tell you the real results of the WHI. The average age of the women was 63, and they had not taken HRT before. This means that they had been without estrogen for over 10 years. The WHI was designed as a trial of healthy women. However, 50% were smokers, 33% were overweight, 33% had high blood pressure, and 4% had diabetes. Every one of those things is a risk factor for heart attack. So these women were already at high risk for a heart attack. If you add that to the fact that they had been postmenopausal for over 10 years, you can be sure that they were at really high risk for a heart attack. The actual results were that with estrogen and progesterone, heart attacks increased 26%. But the actual numbers for the 26% translated into 7 more heart attacks per 10,000 women per year. And the part that you didn't hear was that the risk of heart attack in women between the ages of 50 and 59 who took estrogen alone was decreased by 50% in that study. So this one study, with its flawed design and faulty reporting, is the one that freaked everyone out and still does today. Well, after the frenzy settled down, all the data from the WHI was reanalyzed. And the ultimate conclusion was that early initiation of HRT in the early years of postmenopause is associated with lower rates of heart attacks. But as you increase the length of time between estrogen loss and initiation of HRT, the rate of heart attacks increases. And once lipid has built up in your arteries, HRT cannot reverse it. This has become known as the timing hypothesis. And it's all the same stuff I taught you in videos 80 through 90 on the estrogen window of opportunity. Simply put, if you begin HRT in the early years of your postmenopause, before your arteries are clogged with lipids, you can prevent the clogging and prevent a heart attack. But if you don't start HRT in your early postmenopause and you go more than 5 to 10 years without it, HRT will not reverse the clogging, nor will it prevent a heart attack. And at that point, it may even cause a heart attack because your arteries just can't handle it anymore. So, the WHI should have made a distinction between prevention and cause, but it didn't. But it did set the stage for the next study, the Kronos Early Estrogen Protection Study, or KEEPS. And as you might expect, its objective was to determine if early start HRT is beneficial rather than harmful for atherosclerosis. In other words, it addressed the ability of HRT to prevent atherosclerosis. So it did not focus at all on cause or treatment. It included only women in early postmenopause who had no lipid buildup in their arteries. And I can't tell you the results because it's still ongoing at the time I'm recording this video. And there are two other studies taking place presently. One is the early versus late intervention trial with estradiol, also known as ELITE. Its objective is to determine if early use of estrogen will decrease the risk of heart attacks. My hypothesis is that they will discover that it does. This is still within the realm of prevention. And the other ongoing study is the Nurses' Health Study Part 3, or NHS 3. This one is a long-term study. It looks at younger women between the ages of 30 and 55 years old. And it seeks to follow them over time so that it can take into account all the factors that affect heart attack risk as women age, and then discover how to prevent it. So, if you line up all these studies, you can see how one led to the next. And you can see how we got to where we are today. If you ask me, we really haven't made much progress. I mean, we were percolating along, discovering each piece of the puzzle, and then bam! The WHI stopped everybody in their tracks and caused all the progress we'd made for over a century to end. And I just hope we can recover and continue to do what's most beneficial for women. So you know me, I've created a timeline. I just couldn't help myself. I think I should have been a researcher. Here's the timeline. Halfway down the slide, you can see the horizontal line designating time running from left to right. And above that line, I have put the events and studies that occurred before the year 2000. HA is an abbreviation for heart attack. And I've colored them in green for go because they all pointed to beneficial aspects of HRT for reducing the risk of heart attack. Below the timeline, I've listed the studies that occurred after the year 2000. The positive aspects of those studies are in green for go, and the negative aspects of those studies that suggested estrogen does not reduce the risk of heart attack are in red for stop. In purple, I've indicated the point in time in which the focus turns to the timing hypothesis, implying that HRT is beneficial if you take it early in your postmenopause, which is prevention, and HRT is risky if you take it late in your postmenopause, which is cause. And the studies in orange are the ones that are ongoing. They all address the timing hypothesis in one way or another. So now I hope you understand why there's been such confusion. Mostly it results from failure to specify the variables that will sway the results one way or another. And in the case of HRT and heart attack, there's been a huge derailment and loss of momentum that occurred with the reporting of the WHI results. The bottom line of all these studies collectively is very simple. HRT can prevent heart attack if you take it before you have heart disease. HRT can cause heart attack if you take it once you already have heart disease. And HRT cannot treat heart disease once you have it. And please, let this be a lesson in how you have to know the details of a research study before reacting to it. No one study is capable of telling you everything about anything. Each one addresses one particular question. You have to analyze many studies to get the information you need for managing your menopause. And you have me to do that for you. Okay, I'll sign off for now. If you need a private consultation, go to my website, which is menopausetailor.me. Be sure you subscribe and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And come back in a week for the next video on why all the confusion about hormones and heart attack.